Hello, it's Jerry Delemus and Mac Ruiz, and we're covering a former Russian operative, intelligence officer, Yuri Bezminov. And this is part 4 of a series that we're doing on him, and telling you and us is how the Russians were infiltrating our country and our government, and the operations that they were doing and still are having a great effect on our country. And so let's get started so we can hear what Yuri has to say about the Russian infiltration of America.
Given visa to USSR or not.
So they were selected ahead of time.
Yes, they were pre-selected very carefully, and there is not much chance for honest journalists to arrive to USSR and to stay there for 1 year and to bring this package of lies back home. This, for example, is a centerfold of the Look magazine. They presented this monument erected by Communist Party in Stalingrad as the symbol, personification of Russian military might. And they said in the article, which is published on the site, that Soviets are very proud of the victory in the Second World War. This is another big myth, a lie. No sensible people would be proud to lose 20 millions of their countrymen in a war which was started by Genoese Hitler and Comrade Stalin and paid by American multinationals. Most of the Soviet citizens look at this type of monuments with disgust and sorrow, because every family lost father, brother, sister, or child in the Second World War. Yet American journalists who were trying to appease, to please their hosts, presented this picture on the centerfold as the symbol and personification of Soviet national, they call it Russian national spirit. And it was greatest misconception and a very tragic misunderstanding. Of course, Look magazine was not distributed in USSR. The main audience was in United States. But I presume that many Americans, millions of Americans who were reading Look magazine at that time, had absolutely wrong idea about the sentiments of my nation, about what the Soviets are proud of and what they hate. This is a group, you see the same lady with the sword in Stalingrad. This is the group of journalists. Myself is in the center with the same devilish smile. And Mr. Philip Harrington is on the extreme left there with his camera. This is the gentleman which was so deaf or so uninterested in what I had to say to him. This is the same picture, a blow-up of the same picture. Many guests from various countries, in this particular case from Asia and Africa, were taken by me as a Novosti press agency employee for a tour across Siberia, for example. We would show them typical kindergarten, you see, nothing special by American standards, just nice children sitting, eating their breakfast or lunch. What they could not understand, or they pretended not to understand, that this is an exemplary kindergarten. This is not the kindergarten for average person or average family in USSR. And
Kinda
we
seems like
maintain
North
that
Korea a little
illusion
bit, huh?
in their minds. You can see
Right.
myself under the red spot in the middle there, with the same business-like expression. I'm doing my job. That's what I'm assigned to do, and that's what I was paid to do. But deep inside, I still hope that at least some of these useful idiots would understand that what they are looking at has nothing to do with the level of affluence in my nation. This is a better picture which reflects the true spirit of the Soviet childhood. This picture was printed in a Canadian government publication by mistake. In the middle, you can see children playing on a small courtyard, and the caption goes, "This is a typical kindergarten in Siberia." What these idiots didn't understand, that it is not kindergarten at all. It is a prison for children of political prisoners. But there was not a single mentioning that what they were visiting actually was an area of concentration camps. And the job of people like myself to help them to not to notice that they are actually talking to prisoners. Most of the children were dressed, especially on the occasion of the foreigners' visit. Of course, there were no corpses on the ground. There were no machine gun guards. And the well, it looks not very pleasant, as you see. It looks dull, but obviously it does not create an impression that this is actually a prison.
Well, did any of the journalists have the curiosity to ask about prisons and that kind of thing?
Yes.
They were in Siberia. This
Yes.
is what you associate.
Yes, some of them asked questions, and naturally we would give them, for the stupid question, we give them stupid answer. No, there are no prisons in Siberia. No, most of the people who you see are free citizens of USSR. They are very happy to be here, and they are contributing to the glory of the socialist system. Some of them pretended that they believe what I was telling them, and most of them, we may discuss it later. What are the motivations of these people? Why would they stubbornly bring lies to their own population through their own mass media? I have various answers to this. There is not a single explanation. It's a complex of explanations. It's fear, pure biological fear. They understand that they are on the territory of an enemy state, a police state. And just to save their rotten skins and their miserable jobs, their affluence back home, they would prefer to tell a lie than to ask truthful questions and report truthful information. Second, most of these schmucks were afraid to lose their jobs, because obviously if you tell truth about my country, you will not last long as a correspondent of New York Times or Los Angeles Times. They will fire you. What kind of correspondent are you? You obviously cannot find common language with Russians if they kick you out in 24 hours. So just by trying to be conformist to their own editorial bosses, they tried not to offend the sentiments of the Soviet administrators and people like myself. Deep inside, I hope they would insult my or offend my sentiments. Obviously, they preferred not to. Another reason, I refuse to believe it, but obviously there is another reason. Obviously, it's a greed. These people earn a lot of money. When they come back to USA, they claim that they are experts on my country. They write books which sells in million copies, titled like Russians, The Truth About Russia. Most of it is lie about Russia. Yet they claim to be Sovietologists. They play back myth about my country, the propaganda cliches. Yet they stubbornly resist the word of truth. If a person like Solzhenitsyn is either defecting or kicked out of USSR, they try all their best to discredit him and to discourage him. I don't have much chance to appear on national network with a true story about my country. But a useful idiot like Hendrik Smith or Robert Kaiser, they are big heroes. They come back from USSR. They say, oh, we were talking to dissidents in Russia. Big deal. Soviet dissidents are chasing American correspondents in the streets, and they are cowardly escaping from these contacts. For some strange reason, if you want to know more about Spain, you refer to Spanish writers. If you want to learn more about French, you read French writers. Even about Antarctica, I bet you would read Penguins. Only about the Soviet Union, for some strange reason, you read Hendricks and Schmendricks and all kind of Kissingers, because they claim that they know more about my country. They know nothing, or next to nothing, or they pretend that they know more than they actually do. I would say they are dishonest people who lack integrity and common sense and intellectual honesty. They bring back all kind of stories like that. A kindergarten in Siberia. Omitting the most important fact, it's a prison for children of political prisoners. Another greatest example of monumental idiocy of American politicians. Edward Kennedy was in Moscow, and he thought that he is a popular, charismatic American politician who is easygoing, who can smile, dance at the wedding in Russian Palace of Marriages. What he did not understand, or maybe he pretended not to understand, that actually he was being taken for a ride. This is a staged wedding especially to impress foreign media or useful idiots like Ed Kennedy. Most of the guests there, they had security clearance, and they were instructed what to say to foreigners. This is exactly what I was doing. You can see me in the same damn wedding palace in Moscow where Ed Kennedy was dancing here. You see, smiling. He thinks he's very smart. From the viewpoint of Russian citizens who observe this idiocy, he's narrow-minded, egocentrical idiot who tries to earn his own popularity through participation in propaganda farces like this. Here you can see myself. On the right, again, exemplary Soviet bride. On the left, 3 journalists from various countries, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Obviously, they enjoying the situation. They will go back home and write the reports. We were present on a regular Soviet wedding. They were not present on a regular Soviet wedding. They were present, they were part of a farce, of a circus performance. Another thing which I had to sometimes risking my life to explain to foreigners. Time magazine, for example, is very critical of South African racist regime. The whole article was dedicated to the shameful internal passport system where blacks are not allowing to live with whites. For some strange reason, for the last 14 years since my defection, nobody wanted to pay attention to my passport. This is my passport. It also shows my nationality, and it has a police rubber stamp, which is called propiska in Russian language, which assigns me to a certain area of residence. I cannot leave that area, same way as this black man cannot leave the area in South Africa. Yet we call South African government racist regime. Not a single Jane Schmonda or Fonda is brave enough, courageous enough to come to media and say, look, this is what happens in USSR. I send a copy of my passport to many American liberals and civil rights defenders and all the other useful idiots. They never bothered to answer me back. This shows what kind of integrity, what kind of honesty these people are. They're a bunch of hypocrites because they don't want to recognize a good example of racism in my country.
Not much has changed there.
This is the first stage of befriending a professor. You can see myself on the left with the same James Bond smile. On the right is my KGB supervisor, Comrade Leonid Mitrokhin, and in the middle a professor of political science in Delhi University. The next stage would be to invite him to a gathering of Indo-Soviet Friendship Society. There he is sitting next to his wife before he is being sent to USSR for free trip. Everything is paid by the Soviet government. He was made to believe that he is invited to USSR because he is a talented, sober-thinking intellectual. Absolutely false. He is invited because he is a useful idiot, because he would agree and subscribe to most of the Soviet propaganda cliché. And when he is coming back to his own country, he is going for years and years to teach the beauties of Soviet socialism to newer and newer generations of his students, thus promoting the Soviet propaganda line. The KGB was even curious about this gentleman. It may look innocent.
I think that's a good place to actually stop. What is your take on the fact that they would bring people over that were university professors, also acting as journalists, so that way they would go back and praise the workings of socialism?
Well, it explains a lot about the conditions of our society right now after all of the students who have gone through college back then, and then many went back on to teach college and the teachers' colleges, and brought their Marxist policies, dreams, if you will, into the public arena. Is being the way that we need to lean. You know, they say socialism, and but really it's not socialism is what they're going for.
Correct.
And it's amazing that one can be so blind to ignore the poverty of most of the people in that nation, and then think, well, that's a good idea for America. And while these college professors are making a good living. Right, they're living the capitalist dream, if you will, and but they're trying to turn it into a Marxist society, and it's frightening. And that's part of the problem that America's got, Mac, is that it's been generational. I mean, when was this? 1984, when Yuri did this.
When he was talking, but when he was doing this, that was 30 years prior, so that'd have been the 50s, 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, and you think about that,
70s maybe.
yeah, and that explains a lot of why we have the AOCs of today.
Right, because they were
Yeah,
taught by these people that were coming back,
that's it.
praising this. And a great quote that I've always liked is socialism always ends in starvation and genocide.
Hmm. Yeah, and the thing is, but in the state-controlled media, and which we really have today, is the
Right.
state-controlled media. I mean, our media is not free and open. I mean, we got freedom of the press, but the press is too corrupted to utilize it, and
Right.
it leads to other outlets such as ours that we're using that, and many others, and is to get the truth out of what is happening. They talk about, we just went through a whole thing on inflation about, oh, we got to stop. They put out a bill to stop inflation, right? The bill to whatever it
Yeah.
was that the president signed in to try to curb inflation by raising taxes
Right.
and then hiring another 89,000 IRS agents. So what happens? What's the Federal Reserve do? They raise interest rates because they're going to curb inflation. Well, how's that curb inflation? I mean, if you think about it, is what happens is then they raise interest rates. So who's paying that? The guys who are living on their credit cards are really getting beat up,
Right.
or use their credit cards
Yep.
and don't pay it off every month. Trying to buy a home or buying a home, and if they have a variable or even a business on a variable interest rate, they're getting the interest rates have doubled.
Yeah.
So what happens? Who's making the money? Who's saving the money? Well, the banks are getting money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
Well, I
the
mean,
people. That's not helping us at all.
yeah, and the
And
Fed Reserve, the chairman, he even said the only way to stop inflation is that we need to get businesses to lay people off. We need
yeah,
to be
perfect.
up to what, 6, 7, 8% was it unemployment, and then inflation will drop.
Yeah. Well, they're not concerned about inflation. None of them are,
Right.
until it hits American workers' pocket. When the American worker starts making more money, then all of a sudden inflation's a problem.
Right.
But when it's costing the American people money, they don't care. They never. I mean, and you can test that on your local town, state, and city taxes.
All right.
Because they raise them every year. They're going to raise them every time a budget goes through. That's raising taxes on you. They don't complain about that inflation at all.
Right.
The inflation they care about is when you're making more money, because you're harder to control. You become more independent.
Right.
And if you're under their thumb, then they control everything. You think about all the subsidized housing, Section 8 housing in this country. They're always talking about workforce housing and all of this. Oh, we need this for workers. No, what the workers need is a good wage. That's what they
Right.
need, is a good wage.
Right.
And they suppress that good wage coming in. That's why they keep the border open.
Right.
Is to suppress that good wage. Oh, well, nobody else will do it. Well, sure, they're not going to do it for what you can get illegals to do it for.
Right.
But if the illegals come in legally and have those employers hire them at wages where they have to pay their taxes on them and all the other things that go with that, and have to compete in the open market with American citizens, is
Right.
then the wages are going to go up. And what Yuri's, I think, and this all ties into what Yuri's talking about,
Yeah.
is they depress our economy, because the Russian philosophy, if you will, Marxism and all that, really only works where they can get the people on their side is if they depress the economy.
Right.
They've got to put the people. That's how Hitler gained control. They had hyperinflation in Germany at that time, but that's where they grab control, so they can have discontent with the people, and people are going to vote for their wallet, right?
Yeah.
Or accept things that they normally wouldn't accept.
Well, yeah, when you put an entire society of people in a situation in which they cannot grow their own food, raise their own, cattle, chickens,
due to government regulation,
due to government regulations, but also incentivizing people to congregate into smaller tighter enclaves and vertical towers.
right,
Move them to the city, using government and big corporations, move them closer to the city. When stuff goes sideways, it's way worse in a city than it ever is in the country, because in the country they still live. So when you're looking at the socialistic incentives, well, you've got the majority of your population living in big cities. Well, they're going to be asking the government for help when the government causes something to go sideways. And the government's like, well, to do that, we need to raise taxes.
Well,
and
and
then
it takes some of your rights away. Because
right. But most of the time, people don't even care at that point, right? Because I know the Declaration of Independence, you know, it's life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It's and liberty. If you look up the root word, the actual root word of liberty, it is that it's the freedom. The opposite of anything being free, to being to have liberty, freedom, is security. Those are antitheses of each other. You cannot have safety and security while having freedom and liberty. They do not coexist together. So
it was said that a government that can provide for all of your needs can take everything away from you as well. I'm paraphrasing.
Well, and it's also, and then when you convince the whole society to do one entire shift, say move from a capitalistic or a let's call it a independent, individualistic society into a socialistic, a communal society, which is dependent, that requires a system of governance that's very big, very strong. Well, the second you've got that communal society, when the communal society suffers, it requires the government to come in over the top and then provide or take away. And this is where you get into your legal, this is where you get into your politics of like, you know, they want to take your health care away. They want to take your benefits away. They want to take your food stamps away. And then you got Republicans fighting for giving more subsidies. And then you get Democrats also wanting to give more subsidies. And it's who can give more subsidies in both directions?
To raise the bankruptcy, you know, because the amount of money that the government takes from the taxpayers and then redistributes it, right? Takes that hard-earned money of those who are working, and redistributes it. Well, the government's also getting a cut of that. I mean, when you watch the lotto, right? They just had a lotto was like almost $2 billion, right? Over half of that, or about half of that, is kept by the lottery system, right? And a lot of that's taxes. That's what the government thinks is, I mean, all that money is that the government takes and pays even government employees. That doesn't produce capital into our economy.
Nope.
Because you can test it this way. What I'm saying is, if everybody who doesn't work for the government quit working entirely, paid no taxes in because they're not making anything, is what would happen to those government workers? That it'd be because they're paying their own wage at that point.
Right.
Because any taxes they're paying would have to pay just their own wage.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't keep our economy afloat. And you think about this when you have say a policeman or a fireman or a political whatever who's worked, a city worker who's worked for the city and then retired after they worked 20 or 25 years, 30 years, right? So they work. So then what happens? They retire and then they're getting their retirement pay from the city that supposedly, hopefully, was invested smartly and then and it's paying that. But then what happens is they have to hire another guy, right, to replace that guy. So another 20 or 30 years. So that other guy's probably, who retired first, is probably in his 60s or so, still probably alive, right? When the second guy retires, who now they've got to pay for doing that job. So now we're paying two guys to do that job. We need somebody to do that job. So we got to hire a third guy now to actually do that job. And what happens is the amount of money that takes is huge. Union contracts and such, teachers unions, all of those all work that way. And the system that we have, I mean, retirement back in the 20s for the most part didn't exist.
This is also why pensions failed.
Where?
This is why pensions failed too. Yeah,
it's a pyramid scheme. That's what it is.
Yep.
And all the while, the government's tacking on more taxes, more regulation, because the more money they need, the tighter they have to get. That's why Biden wanted to hire 89,000 IRS agents to squeeze more money out of who? The working people.
Right.
He's not going after people on welfare. Those are, and
he's not going to go after the rich because he already is.
Yeah.
So
So
those
that's
people
how.
are audited 24/7. So,
So
we already know that those 87,000 are coming for us.
that's exactly right. And it ties into what Yuri's saying is because then what happens is when the government needs more money out of the working class, so then how do they get it when the working class saying, hey, look, I don't have enough to pay all the taxes you're charging me. So they stop paying some of those taxes or whatever. So then those 89,000 new IRS agents or whatever hone in on this guy and start taking stuff away from him. And if they can't, then they throw him in jail. Right.
Yep.
So now you end up looking a lot like the former Soviet Union. Is because
Mhm.
the government needs that money to take care of all those promises that they have made to get reelected into office. And then it goes from an election really to tyranny, is
Yep.
because they've got to use the force of government to collect their force of death, if you will, or imprisonment,
Yeah.
to collect the money that they've given away. And it's ridiculous that this happens, but that's the way it goes. If we're not smart enough to look through and see, hey, look, what works? What can the government afford to go ahead and use for helping people out? Because there's situations where people truly need a hand, but it's not the government's responsibility to feed America. That's the Americans' responsibility. Their responsibility is to make sure that we're free enough to be able to do that, so we're not being invaded or what have you, but not to rule over us. But that's the deal, is they think that there are rulers and they're not our public servants. And this is a problem that this is just exactly how the Russians take over. I mean,
Mhm.
through unionizing, whatever, and then they control the unions and the communists, and then they revolt and such. I mean, we had a lot of that going on in the 20s and 30s. I mean, and I don't support unrestricted capitalism, because you can end up with
Well, that's anarchy
company
and
towns.
company towns.
Yeah, but there's a balance there, and that's really what the government's there to do, is provide
Right.
some amount of balance, just to keep it so everybody's playing fair. But when the government's corrupted, the only people that they're looking out for is themselves,
Right.
and
Right.
that's what the issue is. And they're making themselves wealthy in the process, and basically really screwing over the American people. And I mean, quit paying your property taxes. You don't own your property. You don't own your house. I mean, I paid cash for a number of houses. I didn't own one of them. The minute I stopped paying my property taxes, they're starting lien proceedings to take that property away from me.
Right.
So you're always paying on it, and it's a shame that that's what we've gotten into. And this is why our founding fathers were so careful on taxes. That's why they really wanted to do tariffs on everything that came into the country. They
Right.
didn't want the individual citizens being tax collectors on their neighbors, for the
Right.
businesses or whatever it was, and they wanted to control the spending. But they knew that was, I mean, they know the nature of humanity. And
Mhm.
but it's up to us. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to get that straightened out? What do we do to curb that? Because there are policies and ways to do that. But like Yuri was talking about, the reporters being without integrity. If you don't have people of integrity, it's never going to get straightened out. And I would challenge anybody watching this: name off 25 politicians that you think, or that you believe, to have integrity.
And that is a good
Name.
segment. So, guys, comment down below. Name any politicians that you believe that have actual integrity. On that note, go ahead and comment, like, subscribe. Check us out on our Patreon. We do have a Twitter now, so go ahead and hang out with us over there. And see you guys next time for part 5.